You're listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
In the world, you have to get rid of one of these things. All right. It'll no longer exist. You get to determine which one goes away. All right. French toast, pancakes.
French.
You haven't even heard the other choices.
The French.
French toast.
The French people.
Waffles or pancakes.
French toast, waffles, or pancakes?
You have to lose one of those.
There's just those three things?
Those are the three. You've got to lose one.
It's obviously French toast.
No, that's the best one.
It's obviously French toast. It's not nearly versatile enough.
No, it's got egg on it. It's cooked in egg.
You asked for my opinion.
You put powdered sugar on it. You could put all kinds of...
It's obviously French toast.
No, it's not obviously French toast.
Here's how you know. And this is all I got to say.
Let's hear it.
Because
there's a better answer.
There are national restaurant chains dedicated to both waffles and pancakes, and ain't nobody care about French toast. That's all you gotta know.
well, okay. So clearly it's not the waffle. I mean, like Belgium has this whole thing, like the Belgian waffle. They made a whole thing about it. It can't be the waffle. I think you got to go with the waffles. Different.
You're gonna kick out pancakes?
I'm gonna kick out pancakes.
Crazy.
No, French toast is superior to pancakes. I'd rather have French toast. I'll eat a French toast without sugar or syrup or anything. I'll just straight out
bread.
It's bread, but it's also got butter and egg on it. It's better than a pancake.
What?
I don't care. I don't know that the validity of your argument holds up just because there's
I think that says a lot.
That build their brand on pancakes.
I think that says a lot. Think about all the great food items they have changed dedicated just to that food. Hot dogs, tacos, pizza, burgers, pancakes, waffles, French toast. Oh, wait, no. You want that to be an elite tier food?
I would kick out the pancake and I would swap it out with cinnamon rolls. Clearly a superior food.
Okay. It's clearly superior to French toast because there's an entire restaurant chain based on cinnamon rolls.
Yes.
Cinnabon.
Yes.
You can't, there's no getting out of this one. French toast is boring. It's lame. It's often wrongly made.
I'll grant you that.
You get it and it doesn't taste right because nobody knows how to make it.
That's true.
And then it's a disappointment. So
people try and do it with different breads too.
They try to do. I don't know what the right bread is, but I've had it with the wrong. I know what the wrong breads are.
What's the wrong bread?
The wrong bread is whatever I had 2 weeks ago when I was having brunch at someplace in Fort Worth. I don't want to name any names. Ordered French toast because I thought it was going to be fun and tasty, and it was. It was so.
Did they try and do it with like sourdough or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, they shouldn't be.
It was like
just
not
use bread.
It wasn't moist.
Right.
It was just. It tasted like just a big loaf of bread with some sugar on it. It wasn't cooked right. Thank you for that wonderful.
That was my unsolvable question.
I think I solved it.
I don't know.
Well, today we have an expert in solving decisions on the podcast today.
I like that segue.
Aaron Baer. He is a strategic facilitator. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and he is also an Amazon #1 best-selling author. He's the creator of exponential theory. He's worked with the leadership of major companies around the world like Google, Daimler, that's the group that owns Mercedes-Benz, Coca-Cola, and Belfius Bank. We talked with Aaron about a lot. We talked about being paralyzed to make a decision, making decisions without knowing you're making decisions, how curiosity is the key to making group choices, decisions that initiate forward movement, and linear versus exponential thinking and decision-making. This is one of the most insightful guests that we've had on the show. You're going to learn a lot from listening to Aaron. I definitely did. I'm Sanger Smith, as always, with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. Aaron, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, nice to meet you guys.
We decided to bring on the expert change agent so that we can help Sean with all the things he's got going on wrong.
we don't have that kind of time.
I didn't know I was going to facilitate a family matter here today, but
yeah.
I'm up for the challenge.
Apparently this is an intervention I'm just finding out about. So you wrote a book about decision making, exponential theory.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
It's about the power of thinking big. And a lot of times, you make a decision of a strategy that isn't necessarily going to accelerate a company, but it's to maintain a company. And I have a whole process to kind of, what kind of decision is this? So decision making is built into it, because most of the time today, and at boards of global 100 companies or small businesses, the decision is not to make a decision because they're paralyzed by information, by opinions, but they're not able to actually get into the decision and make a decision. Even family offices, I work with a lot of multi-billion-dollar family offices that are just paralyzed to make a decision because of family dynamics. There's just all these information. So my goal as a facilitator is to get, and there's something called the collective wisdom or collective illusion. You were talking about this collective wisdom that gets collected, but there's an illusion of what people will say is their opinion publicly versus what their real opinion is. And this obviously is exacerbated in politics, but it also is in every decision. Is like what we want to say to a group of people, that our decision is very different than someone, a CEO in his office saying, this is the decision and putting it out. It's a very different decision than he's with a group of people, a board of directors or whatnot. So it's a matter of, getting the public and private opinions congruent.
I'm curious, Aaron, what causes that kind of difference between the public and private decision? I think we can all look at the politicians and say, I don't want to be that guy. But if we're honest with ourselves, we've all done that. Yeah, I've done that.
Well, I think it's just a matter of perception. Is we often judge a group and think of what they would be as acceptable behavior, and yet our biases are deeply enrooted in epigenetics, and they come out when it actually makes our private decision. We'll go along with a group to not stir up the pot, whether it's, and this is the dangerous part of society we live in with social media, creating extreme opinions on every side of the equation. All of a sudden you have groups of people going along with decisions that they would have never, they would have thought through it and said they would have made their own opinion. But now they're just like, I'm too tired and exhausted from all this information. I'm just going to go and, whether you believe in a far, conservative or Trump or Republican or Tea Party or whatever it is, you're just like, that's the decision I made, which is a pretty lazy way to go through life. But that's what we're doing today, even by the people we're surrounded with, our social media feed that feeds us. It makes us inactive to say this is the public persona. So all of a sudden, when you get into a boardroom or a family office and you want to make a decision, all those things are coming into this decision. And that's where there's a couple book, one called Collective Illusions by David Rose, and another one called Against Empathy by Paul Bloom. Two very, very good books that I always recommend to leaders, because they really look at these social problems. One, the collective illusion we just talked about. The second is empathy. And this I think he started this argument because everyone says the world needs more empathy. But what empathy is it's a story about an individual that all of a sudden you'll make a decision on behalf of one individual against the collective, group of people or a group or the world. And it's because you start to feel for that. So empathy in itself has biases in it that are ingrained into how we feel about certain people and certain things. So it's more about getting to what you'd call rational compassion, where you can actually synthesize, the empathy for maybe a situation, but then start to look at all the different shareholders or all the different people involved in that decision. And that's in my book. I have something. I'm sure you guys have heard of the golden rule, right?
Of course, yeah.
Sure. So have you heard of the platinum rule?
No.
Okay. The platinum rule is treat others as they want to be treated, which I think today we're starting to see that demanding is not treat others as you want to be treated. And then beyond the platinum rule in my book is the rhodium rule, which is to think about the entire ecosystem, because so much leaders today are making decisions or not making decisions with a lot of unintended consequences of that. And I think that's where all of a sudden we have a ripple effect, and this is happening in politics. It's happening in every company in America, down to small businesses, where the indecision actually has consequences.
Of
And
course.
in a
Yeah.
world that is accelerating and change, we have to speed up our decisions, and we have to be willing to make more mistakes. And the reality is we have to avoid cancel culture. We have to understand that we learn from our mistakes and keep moving forward. And I think that's a part of society that we really have to get over right now, is to have some compassion for people that they're learning, because everyone is on a different journey and has a different set of biases and family histories and everything. We didn't choose our families. We didn't choose where we grew up. We didn't choose a lot of times our religion or our race or any of those
Hmm.
things. It's just, how can we actually evolve so that we actually start thinking about all people when we're making decisions, not just thinking about our people or our tribe and those kind of things, which you see often politically, religiously. You can name the different subjects, but all those alter our decisions, because publicly and privately we feel differently of what we'll say publicly than what we'll say privately. And you see it in the vote and politics, but you also see it in a boardroom of a global 100 company that I've spent time in Tel Aviv with board of directors of a global car maker. And you'll see they all come from different paths, and they all have very different opinions on how it should happen. And what happens is it paralyzes. It's like, well, let's just talk about it some more and we'll make a decision. But with the whole world passing those companies by, growing exponentially, now you see those cars literally driving, you see that car company driving those cars off the cliff, which was my role to come in and say, hey, galvanize a decision, because there's all these exponential companies that are aimed for you. Your indecision is a decision that actually affects hundreds of thousands of jobs. And now we're seeing that as those car makers are laying off those people, and candidly even making multi-billion-dollar decisions. I was fortunate enough to be in Seattle with the two right people in the company. One person was the chief of staff to the CEO, and another person who was head of all production. And they were about to make a $14 billion as car makers build, off of 7-year runs of cars. So they build the whole, the assembly line, and they're about to invest in it for combustion engines. This was only a couple years ago, where there were signs that electric vehicles were starting to be in demand and wanted. But
Yeah.
we literally got a decision where they figured a way out to make a minimal investment to keep things moving, but obviously transferred electric vehicles, as almost every car company on this planet has been in that transition, and figuring out how to compete where they don't know how to compete, and have a far inferior technology.
So they were stuck. They weren't going to go into electric vehicles. I'm assuming that they recognized that even before speaking with you, that was probably not the best outcome.
Well, it is, but when you have a group of people that are surrounded by good results, and you got to think that the economy was buzzing along, they were hitting their 7 to 10% growth, which is linear good growth for their company. But there was companies growing 10x, taking their market share, and that's where they finally had to recognize that we have to make a decision. And that's really where we created the friction to make them make a decision, because at the end of the day, I think my biggest job in facilitating any size of company is to help them make decisions for their future. And just understand is like, there will be mistakes. It's just, how fast can you make decisions so you can iterate on those mistakes to get to a model that works?
You said something interesting there, friction to make a decision. I want to come back to that, because I have so many questions just on that comment.
Yep.
You obviously have a ton of insight on decision making on a personal level and on a big company wide in the boardroom level. What was your journey through life to gain this level of insight that can take you to the boardrooms of these top companies?
Well, my life's been largely in sales. I actually, was early on. I think sales is the lifeblood of every company. So you're always,
Yeah.
galvanizing and championing a group of people to obviously, and I've created a whole process called the buyer funnel, where I don't think you sell to anyone. I think that they buy. I think we're at a point of education, and there's enough information out there that you really need to guide people, with integrity and authenticity to say, is this the right solution? And, every sales process in the world is built on 3 different things: connect, question, and close. And that's the same with every facilitation process that I've been, for the last 15 years. Just because facilitating got me into the boardroom and got me into bigger decisions, it was challenging myself, to really get into conversations that I could make a bigger and bigger impact. And it started with sales. I ended up being the CEO of the National Association of Sales Professionals, was chairman of that, moved on after 4 years. During that time, I took every sales process there was. And then I started taking a lot of facilitation because I realized that decisions are rarely made by individuals when you get to big decisions. So you have to get a group of people that generally have not the same interest whatsoever. When you talk about IT and marketing and the C-suite, they all have different budgets and different reasons they'd want to use those things. Yeah. So it's to find out, and I have a little motto that I use, is really find out their personal reason for making a decision, which is most people, and I use this in facilitation as well as sales, is how do you actually relate to them personally? Like, what's this going to do for your career if we make this decision or don't? I need to know that. And then professionally, what's it going to, professionally is really what it's going to do for your career or whatever. And then organizationally is really the last thing, which is what most salespeople and most facilitators just focus on that. But I've been with CEOs crying about what happened. They literally have sat and bawled because of their what happened to them when they were a 7-year-old child, that they're still making decisions. And that's where, when you really look at the root of this, we're just the deja vu of living a life mostly of what we did from our childhood, reliving that over and over. What were the decisions we would have made when we were a child? We actually do that. And I've seen this over and over again when I work with different leaders, is you have to get to these kind of root conversations so that they can understand, why are they making the decisions are? Why are the biases? And what are the things holding them back? What somebody told them, some limiting belief that they still live with. And some of the most powerful people in the world, some of the exponential leaders in my book, I've had conversations with and really get deep fairly quickly because they're very interested in this, because for them, they're rarely ever challenged at this level. But at the end of the day, you can always think bigger, and you can always obviously make decisions to get there faster. And today requires both of those things, is to think bigger and make decisions faster, which is why I, candidly have a lot of demand right now, is getting out there and helping organizations think through that so that they can obviously see the future and be part of it, instead of have other companies that are making decisions and growing faster move by them. But my whole career kind of led into just one conversation to the next. And I always look to have a bigger conversation in the next conversation I had. So it would kind of unfolded to where I found myself in these boardrooms of these companies around the world.
I agree with that. When we look at decision making, there are those components: the personal component, the professional component, the organizational impacts, the discussion that you have with people, and this is really unique decision making, is getting groups to make decisions. Because I found that incredibly difficult. You really need a strong leader. You really need a sort of a basis. You have to give sort of everybody, here's the basis upon which we're going to make this decision. If you're trying to get a collective, do you take people through a process to say, all right, here's how collective decisions or group decisions ought to be made? Or are you trying to sort of break down difficulties or barriers that they normally would have? In other words, like let's create more vulnerability and trust, just generally kind of the trust fall kind of stuff? Or do you saying, here's the process you want to go? That's really what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. It's customized to each group. Each group's completely different. For the most part, I'm successful at the end of whatever time I am to get people to, and I always say action, not consensus. I mean, at the end of the day, that's we're never going to get to consensus. We never ever, us three, even you guys being father and son, are never going to see the world the same way. You have a different set of experiences that brought you to the seat you're in. But what I do is I start to establish language at the end of the day, and this goes politically. I work with some politicians on both sides, and the reality is most of it is just language of how we speak about something that causes the friction. And this will go to Sanger's comment about friction. Is friction can be good if we can redefine a term. And I even use this with my own wife. Let's not argue. Let's create new meaning. Meaning, it's obvious if there's something that we're not understanding now, that I need to understand it from your perspective, and you need to create meaning for that of those words. So what do you want me to learn? And it really changes the dynamic where we never argued. It really creates a co-relationship. The same with work relationships. When you get people in the boardroom, or in a group offsite or a strategic planning session, it's sometimes their turn to kind of get their initiatives on the table and get everybody behind it. But what you need to do is first debunk each of their languages. Like marketing has a different language than technology. Leadership has a different language because they talk to investors. Everybody has their own people that they're serving. And so all of a sudden is, how do you create a baseline when we're talking about something? So I'm often like saying, well, how would you interpret that? And asking another group. And at the same time, I'm really bringing people into a conversation where they're making decisions. They just don't know they're making decisions.
Okay, now you got me. You're tricking them. I knew there was some in there, because people, you go to a group, especially executives who, in a bureaucratic environment in a big organization, they become experts at not making any changes, become experts at, how do we slow shit down?
It's the safe bet in the old world. We, in the last 5 to 10 years, that actually is where death of the company, and we're watching companies die because of that right there. And it's why we need to galvanize to make mistakes and make decisions and learn from those as quickly as possible. And that's where speeding up decisions is a big part of my presentation, is just the speed of the world, and that our brain's 10,000 years old. It has not adjusted. We're now have inputs of 70 to 100,000 pieces of information coming into our head. We actually see billions of information subconsciously. So we have all this stuff at our fingertips, but it really has paralyzed us because we were never made for this much information. And what basically happens is, how do you bring it back down almost to a kindergarten? Like I used to teach in sales, like whatever you need to learn in sales is you learned in kindergarten. Like you were an expert at it because you got anything you wanted. You wanted the candy bar, you were persistent, determined, and you just kept asking, and all those different things. And then we unwind that throughout our lives. It's like, don't talk to strangers, and all these different things that adults have done to create these barriers. And then kids grow up hating sales, but they were the best salespeople ever. At least my kids were. I'm not sure if Sanger was when he was.
Yeah, we knew all the tricks.
Yeah, you got what you wanted, and I think that's where just asking questions and being curious is probably one of the biggest opportunities. And that's what I do as a facilitator, is I just ask questions, because I don't necessarily have to lead the conversation with questions. Is then I just engage the other people to really engage in that conversation. But the model I have, just to kind of give you a little bit of for your listeners, a view. I'm sure you heard of VUCA, which was created by these Afghan generals. At the Afghanistan war had generals in it. This is back in '87, and they created this term VUCA because they didn't know who their enemy was. They didn't know who their friend was. They didn't know what they're fighting for. They're like, this is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So they created this whole term VUCA. It's kind of now risen to be a term for current day society everywhere, is like what's going on here. So in it, there's a gentleman that created a process that took off that acronym, is vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. And if you can take that model as a mental model and bring it into any group, is we start to establish what is the common vision. And that's where you start to have this language, like these conversations that I led with, is how do I actually break it down to where I understand each of your visions? And then how do I bring them together so that they're overaligned? And somehow, I'll be candid on this, I don't know how I do it, but subconsciously, I somehow weave this all together when I'm standing in the middle of the group and bringing them together, and bringing words together where they can actually agree on. And then all of a sudden their visions start to merge together a little bit, and they start to get some action, and everybody's getting a little bit of what they want. Nobody's getting all of what they want, which is the reality of decisions. Is there's no perfect decision ever. And in fact, no decision is the worst decision in my mind, because we don't learn anything. And then I really teach the board, you need to learn or win. There is no failure here. At the end of the day, the failure is if we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So it's like, let's make decisions, and we're either going to win big because we're going to be thinking big, or we're going to learn quickly and we're going to iterate on that. And that goes to that last A of agility. So establishing a vision, getting everybody to understand that language, those language barriers, which sometimes can be cultural, generational. There's all kinds of different things that come into a group of people that you have to kind of consider. And then providing the clarity is, how do you actually organize that in a way that you get people to actually be able to say, yes, I'm on board. I want to move this. I'm very excited. And there is, just like any kind of motivational coach, is galvanizing people to see momentum and see that the group can move and make a decision. And if everybody makes it, it's a really easy decision. And that's where I say, we're just going for action, not consensus. And then honestly, it's the agility, that learn or win mentality is, we really want to celebrate our failures. Our whole chapter on this, Amazon's really good at this. Their group that had one of the biggest flops ever, the Amazon phone, if you remember that, and most people don't, but it was a $300 million bet that flopped
never
in
heard of
6
that.
months.
Maybe there's a reason.
But that same team then turned around and created Alexa. And Alexa now is the number one consumer product. And you would never think that Amazon would lead the way in home products, but it led them to a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. And still Alexa is far above superior technology to Siri and Google and some of the others, and leads the way as far as adoption. So those are the kind of things, is that they didn't take the team and say, you failed, sorry, you guys, go find another job, you wasted a lot of our money. They said, find something else, you learned something from this, what can you turn that into? And that's the organization of the future.
I'm nodding along with everything you're saying about fast decision-making, agile decision-making. I'm a little biased, Aaron. I took a DISC assessment like a week ago, and I took it a year ago, and I got a 99 on the D score, which, driving quick decision-making, being assertive. And that for sure comes with a lot of downsides. They made sure to point out to me when they were facilitating my understanding of that assessment. I looked at it like, yeah, I won.
You're like, I'm winning.
First place, baby. But you're saying, it all resonates with me. It's very important to make confident, quick decisions, and it's increasingly more common. What I don't know is why it's so much more important now than it was even 10 years ago.
Well, it's that we live in and Sanger, I'm going to get you a book and you're going to read it, because we live in an exponential world that is exponentially changing. So we cannot no longer, if we go back to the 70s, you didn't have to make decisions because things didn't change very fast. In fact, the bureaucracy really led the way. Now you have a group of individuals that have equal access to all the platforms and all the systems that the big companies do. So they're sitting in an accelerator or a garage or an incubator or a WeWork, and they're thinking about how they could reinvent one part of your business. Well, there's 1,000 of those wanting to reinvent every part of your business. So no longer can you stand on your size and your dominance and not make decisions. In small companies, it's the same way. There's a lot of small companies that never get there because they don't make the big decisions to go for it. They just play the safe bet. They create a lifestyle business. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's, that's Main Street America and entrepreneurs. And it's a great thing. It's just know that there's companies that they may have a hard time staying in business because there's someone down the street thinking bigger than they are. And they're likely to take their customers in a few years instead of a few decades, which is how it used to be. So it's just a matter of the speed of the world. When you look that we're connected globally, and everyone in this world is, and I talk about it in the book, the network effect is, there's a rule that every time you add someone on the network, you double the capacity. Well, we're now at 5 billion people into one network. Well, all of a sudden, you now create a lot of power for these central companies that are like controlling access to that network. And that also, though, enables these small companies to really grow off of that if they're really agile and they're really quick in their decisions and, find the trends and move quickly. And that's where, no longer the S&P 500 used to have an average lifespan of 65 years. This is 30 some years ago. It was actually 67 years. It's down to 15 years now as a company spends on the S&P 500. So the life cycle of companies is shrinking. And it's largely because of people not making decisions. It's no other thing, because they can make decisions, and a lot of them get taken over and merged down because they're shrinking or someone's buying market share or whatever. But those are generally not decisions that people are making. They're being made for them by the shareholders or someone else. So if your company's to stay alive, it's because you're being agile, because everyone has the same vision, understanding, and clarity. And that's a process that it's an art. It's not a science. There's no one way to do it. And you have to deal with a lot of people, and people are messy. And the reality is, the one thing I usually show when I give PowerPoints is, I'm like, here's the strategy. And it's really this ball that's all wound up. And I'm like, you got to make a lot of mistakes up here. And then you start to figure it out. And then you start to get exponential, literally get exponential at the end, because you got that vision, understanding, and clarity. And now people are moving in the same direction. And when everybody's moving in the same direction, things happen fast. And that's what we're seeing when you go into an exponential company, where I would take these people from these, literally $100 billion companies into companies that were 100 million. And you realized, oh, well, they're never going to affect us. Well, yeah, but they're growing 10x. Next year, they're going to be $1 billion company. And the year after that, they're going to be a $2 billion company. And all of a sudden, their market share actually takes a hit for that. And they're like, oh, well, we should have paid more attention or whatnot. And so it really is, decisions are an important part of making investments and everything. I mean, there's a lot of different trends that you can make decisions. You can make bad decisions, but making no decision is worse than making a bad decision, in my mind. Now, I think the public probably thinks differently. They want to cancel everyone that, makes a bad decision, but that is what it is.
No, you're totally right. We're in the minority in the belief, placing a premium on speed.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who feel like they want to avoid making a bad decision without recognizing that no decision is in fact a decision. It's a decision not to act. And while they're not acting, the world's moving past them. And I think it's particularly challenging for groups and committees. And, you talked about, I was had a discussion this past week. I sold a business a couple of years ago and was doing some coaching with them afterwards. And we realized that there was some real friction in the decision-making. And so it was curious to me. And what I had observed was, and I made this comment to them, I said, it looks like you guys have conflicting values, so that there were 4 owners. And I said, you guys are not on the same page. What we finally realized was that they were having difficulty making decisions because the values that I had and the vision that I had written for the company, they were still operating on, but they weren't aligned with those values and vision. It didn't make them bad. They were just different. And so they were making decisions based on the internal values that they had not cleared with each other. And so they had a different set of values among them, hadn't agreed on the new values, and everybody was still sort of thinking they should have been making decisions based on the values that I had or I had established for the company, some 15 years prior. And so they were really having difficulty, and it was creating a lot of friction on decision making. I want to go back to, you were talking about linear decision making versus exponential decision making. Tell me the difference between those two.
Well, I think just to add to your point there, Sean, about what you're saying is the values that's getting that personal, professional, and organizational more aligned, is understanding each person's values and biases and where they come from is important to have real conversations. And I think, oftentimes we shadow that, and this just goes our own belief systems. And so far, we have very divisive beliefs these days because of the world and nature of news and how we get it. Is bringing those together to understand that they do affect just the simplest of decisions. And that leads into kind of your question about linear versus exponential. Our whole lives we lived, I think it goes to Sanger's comment about like, why do we need to change? Well, if you look back on your life, you're going to look chronologically and you say, a year ago I did this, and 3 years ago I did this. And it's very much going to look like just progress year by year by year. Now, a lot of people live their life 1 year at a time. And, they say I have 20 years experience, but they really have 1 year 20 times. And that's the unacceptable part of not making decisions or moving forward to be exponential, because exponential is about growth. So I call it the exponential mindset. And if you're going to shift, one, I'm sure you've talked a lot about the growth mindset on this podcast and heard a lot about, hey, everyone needs a growth, not a fixed mindset, which is very linear. But the growth
Mhm.
mindset, to add to that, is, adding a positive attitude about the future, because you got to think positively about your company or whatever decision, your investment you make. I mean, you shouldn't make it if you're not, if you don't think positively about it. You have to then have that growth mindset. What are we going to have to do to really scale into this? And then you have to think big. And that's where the part that I can challenge people is, if I asked, where Decidedly is going to be in 5 years, you guys are loving what you're doing. Well, how do you grow at 100x? How do you? What is 100x to you? What is 10x to you? And when you start trying that on, what does that mean? Well, obviously, it's probably a different experience, and it's something that'll challenge your own brain to say, I've always been thinking linear. I just know what I need to do this next year. And Bill Gates has a quote that I have in my book, that people often overestimate what they'll do in 1 year, but underestimate what they'll do in 10
Yeah.
years. And that's where I
Yeah.
always like I have a whole chapter about thinking long term, because if you think longer term, if you start thinking 10 years out, you can start to think exponential. And that goes, I have a story in the book about Elon Musk that talks about, there's not many companies that are saying in 2040 they're going to land on Mars, right? So he has SpaceX. So I actually invented a term called Mars shots, because Google has moon shots. Well, Elon Musk was just like, I got to think bigger than that. We're going to go to Mars in 2040 and we're going to civilize it. Well, regardless if he ever gets there or not, he's the largest private space company, shutting astronauts back and forth to the International Space Station. He's already accomplished, in a way, a Mars shot, much bigger than any other privatized space. And he's starting to win the war on talent over NASA, which has historically been the best place to work on the planet, where they have very low turnover, because you have your very people that are working on the biggest things in the world. So all of a sudden, when you can start thinking bigger, one, you're going to sound really crazy to people around you that are not used to it. And that's when you start thinking 10x or 100x. But I think once people, and I was with a company in Asheville that's a real estate company, and their CEO said, I used to stand in front of our group and people just thought I was crazy, but then we started hitting our goals. And then all of a sudden they believe, and now they're pushing me to create bigger goals. So we're accelerating faster. They're making decisions faster. So I'm part of coaching that organization and really helping them think bigger. But, their goal is now to be a Fortune 500 company. They're a couple $1 billion real estate holdings, and they literally want to, really change the way this works. And they have a team now that thinks and believes it. All I can say is I would bet on the group that believes in something. A small group in the world has changed just about everything. And that's the part of galvanizing a group to think bigger. And that's that exponential mindset, where you see it when you talk to people that think exponentially versus linearly. And that was kind of really inspired this book of exponential theory, which the theory really is once you start to think bigger, you become more conscious. And what that really means is you start to think about all the different stakeholders that are involved. That rhodium rule that I talked about is thinking about the entire ecosystem. When you do that, one, you start making more informed decisions. There's not unintended consequences. I don't want to point anybody out, but we've had a couple presidents. It doesn't matter which side you believe in or whatever. They both have done this. Is really made decisions for a group of people, but not really cared about really the democracy or the platform they represent. And I think what's important is not understanding that's the empathy that you have for the people that really support you or maybe look at like you or have the same religion or whatever it is. We have to get beyond that and really think about, how do we think about all people? Because companies now on these platforms have to really think about all those different people as decision makers. Otherwise, they are going to suffer. They are going to be canceled in one way or another. And I think it's an important part of thinking bigger is to think more conscious. And that's really the theory, because I went in and out of all these exponential companies and I just saw that these CEOs that grew to be unicorns really quick and they were able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. They just talked in a way. They had a language like this that was just, I was like, I need to learn this language. So I wrote a book about it to learn it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy for me. So in 10 years, I should be leading an exponential company. If I haven't, I'm not growing. I'm not leading in the way that I want to.
Right.
And that's just part of my own exponential mindset and belief system, is that I believe I'll do that now because I've wrote it into existence. And I really believe that I'm on that path to get there.
And literally writing it is key. I had a trouble thinking big until a few years ago. A friend of mine challenged me to write down my ideal day 5 years into the future. And I partly because she nudged me and partly because I nudged myself to write down some things that I really didn't think were achievable. I mean, I really thought, this is not going to happen within 5 years. I couldn't see it. I really couldn't see them happening. And I wrote a couple of things down that I remember very vividly. One of them was I woke up that morning on my ideal day and I gave an interview for CNBC. And then the other was that I woke up on a farm 25 minutes from where I live right now with, a lot of spacious land and animals, and just, it was something that I really wanted. I thought at the time, there's no way I'm getting on TV in 5 years, and there's no way I'm buying that farm in 5 years. Mm-hmm. And a year later, I was on Dr. Phil, #1 show on daytime. So even bigger than what I had imagined doing on CNBC. And then just this past week, I am now under contract for that farm. And I'm 3 years into this, not even 3 years into this 5-year period. So the power of thinking big, it impacted me. And as soon as I started to see those things happen, I was like, oh, okay. So I was discounting everything that I thought was possible because I'm looking at what I can see right in front of me. All of my other friends who did that exercise, they're at the same place where they're halfway through their 5 years and they're already 90% complete with all of the monumental milestones that were within that ideal day that they foresaw.
I had that same experience when we moved our office about this was 4 years ago, and so I had this storage room where I'd put old files and notebooks and notes from conferences and all this stuff. It was just full of stuff, and so I had to go through that and finally just clear it out. So I'm just throwing stuff out. I come across this old notebook, and I had a page just like what you had talked about, and I had done it 10 years prior. So it was 10 years old. Yeah. And it was, what do I want to do in 10 years? Where am I going to be in 10 years? It was that far out. But I had just gotten lost in the shuffle over the years. And I looked at that, and like 9 of the 10 had happened. And some of the revenue things were like almost spot on.
Really?
Yeah, it was amazing. Some of these things, and some of them were just pie in the sky things, like I'd like to do this, and they had happened. And so I think there's a component.
Imagine if we read those freaking papers instead of balling them up
instead
and
of just
away.
Putting it in a storage room.
All I had to do was write it down once, and I achieved it. I didn't read it.
That, right? I mean,
yeah.
Subconscious.
Well, yeah, that's my point. Yeah, is that there was a subconscious impact of writing it down that was powerful, that I wasn't even aware of. Obviously subconscious.
I had one just to follow your guys' point is, I found a piece of paper in, it was about 5 years. I put a date that I wanted to have a girl. Don't ask me. I don't even remember doing this, but I put the date April 30th, 2008. I did this like in 2003. And I had a daughter on April 30th, 2008. I did not find it till like 2009, 2010. And I looked at it and it freaked me out. I'm not, the world works in mysterious ways, but it is all about, I have this whole program called Exponential Mindset, Belief, and Attitude that I help, these leaders just create the mindset, belief, and attitude to think bigger. And, it's amazing when people believe in themselves, what they can do. And I think so much of this world is we're doubting ourselves. And that's why we don't make decisions.
Yeah.
Because we have fears and worries and anxieties and stress about the future. But the only time you can create the future is right now. And it's generally making a decision. And if it's a bad decision, it's good because you learn from it quickly and you can get over it. So it's getting people in that mindset to really grow and grow exponentially. And that's where Sanger, I would challenge you now and like Sean to do a 10-year one from today, where you'll be in 10 years. And I want to be back on that podcast in 10 years for you to tell us where you're at.
I'll do it.
Okay.
I'll do it tonight. And the reason I'm confidently saying I'll do it is because I don't want to. Because I hear you say that and I'm like, I don't want to think that far.
Lean into the
pain.
That's
too hard. I can't even conceptualize that. Oh, shoot. Okay, well, I guess I got to do it then.
Eat your obstacles.
All right. I'm committed to that. Disclaimer, this does not work with lottery ticket winnings, investment performance, or anything. Certain things that this will not Oprah manifest for you.
Hey, Aaron, I saw when I pulled up your bio the other day, and I saw that you had developed this bridge forum.
Yeah, I have a business partner, Alan A.P. Powell. He's a pretty influential African-American businessman. And in 2014, we were, basically starting to see Baltimore and Ferguson and these uprisings. And what we realized is there had to be a better solution than just really tearing up in the community. And so we created this forum. And for most part, I'm a facilitator by profession, as you guys know. And so I created a facilitation process where I would take several police chiefs, we bring them together, we'd share best practices, but we'd also bring the community of wherever we were. If we were in Louisville or Indianapolis or Phoenix, Arizona, we actually took this around the country and, created real dialogue, like what needs to change. And we were able to, in certain cities, one city in particular, we created 29 changes to how they policed because we got honest feedback and we really had deep conversations. And this is that collective illusion. We were able to get past the public bias, and that's where so much of everybody, there's a lot of rhetoric around, blue lives, black lives. I mean, at the end of the day, it's figuring out, how do we create a better solution for everyone, because we're putting everyone in harm's way. And we've actually got into this bridge forum where we've really got into, it's a mental health, pandemic. I mean, it really is for police officers that are stressed going in and out of situations. They don't have time to process it. They have PTSD to the extreme of probably more extreme than some of our veterans. And that's where we're seeing suicide rates of law enforcement and the pressure on them. And they're making mistakes. They're making, they need more training. They need more mental health. So this bridge forum really, has a candid conversation. And we partnered with Noble, the National Organization of Black Law Executives, to really have this conversation across the country to really create change systemically. And it's begun to create that systemic change because at the end of the day, everybody wants safe families and safe neighborhoods and, good places to live. It's good for everyone. It's figuring out how do you break those barriers down so that you can see the other side. And this is that empathy that I talked about. It's really having the compassion to understand, how can I solve these problems in a much better way, instead of, putting officers that are going in and out of situations that are already, maybe they came out of a domestic violence and they get on their next incident, or, and they don't behave appropriately because they're really thinking about the last one. And that's what we really have recognized. And, I've even worked with this company called Vitania that works with, rebalancing the brain chemically and electrically. It's a really incredible program, but they're all about helping law enforcement really balance. And they'll help they've lowered their turnover and improved retention because so many officers were leaving. They aren't able to recruit them. So the problem gets worse when you put more and more gas on it. And that's what the media is. They're going to put more gas on both sides of those equation, and it's a combustion that's going to happen. So we wanted to get between that. We have a foundation called Arizona Foundation, and we wanted to get between that conversation to say, there's got to be a better way. Let's get together. Again, everything we talked about at the start of this call of, establishing a vision, getting understanding, creating a common language, because so much of that was not common amongst the community and their law enforcement. Why do they do things? And why does the community react in a certain way? And having those breakouts where we would just, have community leaders and different, and, oftentimes people would raise their voices and we would bring it back to a civil, really civil discourse, having that conversation and say, how do we fix this? Because it's a problem. If it's a problem for you, then it's a problem for us. And that's the you versus us. And then it's like, we can solve this together. And so we started finding these issues, and we actually wrote a book about it that circulated amongst some of the police chiefs. That here's 108 things that police officers do wrong that we found from thousands and thousands of community members giving feedback. And we said, here's some solutions for each one of them. And we were part of some of the people in the White House that kind of rewrote some of the policies when President Obama
so
was
if
in place.
you found 108 things police officers were doing wrong, that had to have been whittled down from more than that. So how many of those were just perceptions from the community
Yeah,
that
no, it was all from the
actually weren't
community.
wrong?
Yeah, and it wasn't. I shouldn't have said just police officers, but it was really just how the community and it's both sides, and that was part of the equation. Is both sides have to come to the table willing to solve the problem. And that's where it's finding those compromises and finding like ways to move forward, because we're in some situations in some cities we were in a standstill. We were actually brought into those cities to kind of get them out of a standstill. So it is a heavy debate. I mean, I lean into very tough conversations, and I come from this place of really understanding my own biases because I've done so much of this work, and very open and transparent. Like I grew up in the South Side of Fort Wayne. I went to a high school that was predominantly Black. It gave me a compassion that's probably different than people that grew up in the predominantly white suburbs. It doesn't make me a different person. It just gave me a different set of values that allowed me to enter this conversation from a different perspective. It also discount that I'm still a white man, in a world that wants to solve a problem for the greater good of society. That's where my business partner and I, really kind of leaned into this conversation to kind of help, really break down the barriers, because we had these, different perspectives that we ourselves to kind of work through as individuals, personally and professionally. And we said, like let's take these organizations and these community leaders, and really, part of it is it comes down to ignorance. Is if you can get people in the same room and they spend some time together, they find common bonds, and they realize that we're all human, and it doesn't matter how different we think we are. We're all the same, and we want the same things. And that's part of the conclusion of a lot of our bridges that we had was, oh my God, now they were exchanging phone numbers. And when something happened, they would call each other, and all of a sudden you were building bridges, and that's the reason we called it the Bridge Forum. Is it's really just opening this communication and giving that new way of so you want to tell me something, let's not yell at me and tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what's the solution, and getting people in solution mode is not easy when they're just used to, basically,
they're at
complaining
a
about
point
the
of high emotion. It's really easy to just point fingers, and that happens in relationships, that happens in business partnerships, happens in marriages. Well, you're just screwing up. Well, hey man, like that's not, I don't want to receive it that way. It seems like a lot of the ways that we could interact more broadly community as citizens is to treat the community in the way that we would treat our spouse or a child or a friend. If everyone knows, hey, if I go up to my business partner, I say, hey man, you're really screwing up. If they're not going to respond well to that. They're not going to, oh, geez, what could I do better? No. Hey, man.
Yeah, they're going to bow up.
Yeah, this is how I feel. This is how I feel. All I want you to know, Aaron, is how I feel. I'm not even asking you to change anything. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. And I'm not even saying that you're necessarily responsible for my emotions. But when it comes to criticizing police officers or teachers or talking about any other political issue that involves large groups of people, we say, this is why y'all suck. And we expect them to go, oh, well, geez, tell me more.
I guess you're right. I guess we all suck. Yeah. Well, and that goes both ways. And I think that had to have been incredibly challenging to facilitate a discussion from two groups that probably were at elevated emotional states, that are really coming to wanting to have the same solution. We want safe communities where there's not a lot of crime. Everybody can agree with that. But one of them sees, we want to do this. We want to take this action. We want to stop and frisk, for example, right? Because, hey, that works, gets guns off the street. And yet the other perspective says, hey, we really don't appreciate being violated like this just for walking down the street, so come up with a different solution. And that had to have been incredibly difficult to come to some consensus on how those behaviors ought to be changed.
Well, and again,
I still
never go
get
for
to the same
consensus. I go
result.
for action. So at the end of the day, it's like, what's a better solution than what we're currently doing? And oftentimes there's fiery opinions when you have this historical debate of, and this goes to language and structure of what, even how you talk about, what you just said, like pull over and frisk or these different things, is like really talking about anew is what's a better way to do that, and hearing that from the community. But one of the ways that you can do it that we were successful with our Bridge Forum, that Bridge Forum is also a bridge in a box. I will share it with any city or anybody that wants to do it. We have a whole process for it. But we would literally have, and this goes to that creating that rational compassion, both for police officers and the community. So we would have panels separate where the police officers would share, how they approach the situation and how they have, really look at, the world they work in and have to explain, this is what I go through on a daily basis. So people actually hear and understand these officers and police chiefs and different people. We literally sometimes would get frontline officers in these conversations, and then we get the community members, and different people that, and some had family members die at the, police hand. So you can imagine the high emotions of that. But when you start to have conversations and you realize that you can create a common vision, you can start to break down barriers. Is that everybody wants that? Nobody wants to just argue forever. And I mean, there may be a few people in the world that just live in that reality that arguing is their comfort zone. But we were able to kind of get people past that to say, like, what can we change, and can we be part of that change? And if the community does this, the police will do this. And we had just interesting conversations that weren't specific tactical things. We ultimately ended up changing how, community offer, like how do we show up in the community, and how do we, and some of that is actually some substantial changes of putting people without guns in the community and building, neighborhood alliances and having, they even have donuts on the corners and different things like that, just so community members could know their local officers. And, all those things are breaking down those barriers that were so much is the us and them. Where the reality is a lot of the officers, lived in that community. We're part of that community. I also think it's very important that it's not just one community's issue, and that's where we started off with this issue that obviously was the African American community, but it's all communities, and we all have to kind of stand for doing a better job in some of these areas. And I think that's the platform that we have an opportunity to kind of be part of is today, is we can solve really big problems. We can think bigger than we have ever in the past. And it's important for all of us as leaders to do that, because no longer can we stand where the few people kind of make decisions for all the rest. That's the part that's been disrupted in this last 10 years. And that's where, we see the democratization of every single industry, of every single thing, is like really giving people that never had a voice, they have a voice, and they need to use it to get the rights that they have never had. We need to figure out how to hear and facilitate that so that we actually create that change. It's not going to happen overnight, but we need to create that longer term vision. Again, I go back to exponential theory is, we can't right a wrong overnight, but we certainly can start moving in the right direction and show support and obviously listen and move things in the right direction, which, I think we are in a lot of cases. I think there's still some others that we have to work on, but that's the, part of it is that we're all diverse. We have different opinions, and makes the world interesting. If we all thought alike, looked alike, had the same religion, it's probably pretty boring. So, we should embrace this and really enjoy it, and honestly spend time amongst different people, which is, a habit I have, is really to get outside of people that are in my socioeconomic, my religion, race, all those different things, because it helps me grow as a person to understand, and like I said, not empathy, but really having a rational compassion for a different viewpoint, because it helps me grow as a person. It makes me a better leader, makes me make better decisions, because I think about all of the different people that I interact with, instead of thinking about, just the people at the country club, or, the people that live in my neighborhood, or the people that go to my church.
It's easy to get trapped up in that bubble and think that the values that are shared within my little micro community at the country club or at the gym or at the church or wherever it is, are the broader and more widely shared values, and they're often not. It's easy to think that the language that we use in those small communities is what maybe should be shared and should be used more broadly, and it's often not. It's simply different. So
Well, and that's
hearing
that
you talk like that,
difference between public and private perception, right? Like what we're willing to say public, we won't, we may have privately different feelings. And I think a lot of our political changes are based on, this fact that we're not congruent, publicly to what our own private opinions are, or, we vote differently than what people think we would because we have these ingrained biases that
yeah,
are
people are
causing
afraid to be
friction.
authentic a lot of times. I know I've done that at times. I wish I could say I've been authentic in every interaction I've ever had, but that's not true.
You should be less authentic.
See, you know what that is, Aaron? You know what that was?
Now I know where you get it, Sanger.
That was the value. That's the revelation of the values of someone who grew up in the 80s, where you couldn't be authentic, where you had to lie about who you were everywhere you went.
Yeah, no, it's a changing generation. I hang around a lot of young
We got good at it.
Gotcha.
We got good at it.
I love the generational debate.
Yeah, you got good at pretending to be something.
Yeah. Don't shit on that.
That's my skill, man.
That's all we had.
You gotta just, you don't have to be your whole self all the time. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying act in public the way you act in your bedroom.
Okay.
Certainly. But be just real. And a lot of people are afraid to be real. They're scared. I think we're scared to be rejected for who we truly are.
But I think that when working with leaders, I think that's the skill that leaders that resonate the most, and that can make mistakes are the leaders that are real up front. At the end of the day, if you see a leader that's real, you can have, compassion for the decisions they make, and they make mistakes. And if they're authentic with it, then you can move past them. The problem is we try to sweep every mistake under the rug. And the reality, we're human. And the one thing about being human is we're messy, and messy relationships, messy everything. And they're never going to be a perfect world. And we just got to continue to move forward and grow from what we learn. And that's the path I take, and what I take with, people I facilitate and, create buyer processes with or whatever. But it is an important part today that I think, more than ever, being authentic really resonates with people. And that's, if you look at viral videos, a lot of times it's because it's either inauthentic or that it's really authentic. It's not in between.
Yeah, that's
true.
You can't straddle the median on being authentic. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't fake authenticity, then you're lost.
If you can't fake it. At least you're authentic to being that way. Hey, thanks so much for being here, Aaron. Where can people find you and get a hold of your book?
You can find me on my website, aaronbare.com, AARONBARE.com, and my books, Exponential Theory, The Power of Thinking Big. It's on Amazon, and I think it's 33% off right now. So
good.
Yeah, the authenticity there, Sean. I'm not gonna forget that, because you have a skill in presenting the boomer values.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not saying that it's not a negative. It is what it is. And growing up, I had to find out, as I got older, that's not always
that people thought differently.
Yeah, well, no, I knew that way before you did. To find out that, the values that were present in this generation are not always they're not necessarily the right and true values, and the values that are present in this community or this city, they're not always the right and true values, and that. It doesn't mean you throw them all away either.
What, you're saying that the values that I ascribe to weren't the right and true values?
Yeah, well, yeah.
What?
Okay, so I think that there is a very high value of being, people won't be, there are some things that you just wouldn't say, right, in a client meeting.
Okay.
I'm going to be very, proper and very professional and very, would never curse in a client meeting. I would never talk about this type of story in a client meeting. Oh, I do that all the time.
Really?
Yeah, if something's bullshit, I'll just tell a client it's bullshit. Like, why do I?
See, I don't,
that's how I
don't
talk.
do that. I don't
Okay,
do that.
then don't. Yeah, and you, even the way you said you don't do it, you said it with judgment.
Oh yeah, I meant to.
I know you did. Hey, if something's BS, you just, why would I not say it? Why would I pretend like I don't say that word? To me, that's being authentic.
No, I think you got a point, Sanger. I think there's a real conundrum though, is really the younger generation is having, I'll call it an avatar, an online presence versus your real presence. And those are truly inauthentic today, and they're getting further and further apart and really causing mental health issues. So I think, older generations, and I consider myself part of that Gen X, I guess you could say. We didn't have social media. Like, thank God we didn't have social media, because I couldn't imagine all the stuff that I did. That was just, and I have this conversation. I have a kid that works for me that's 27. I'm 48. So we have a 20-year gap. Not necessarily father-son relationship, but it has this generational context. But we often have this conversation of just the different perspectives that we have that push us, that, the how we make decisions and how we show up in the world and how we would act in a meeting and everything. And, it's just, they're very, very different. And there's a lot to be learned on both sides of that. And that's what I've kind of embraced, is this new generation is I don't spend a lot of time online because I don't think it's of value to me. To a younger person, I totally see why they do. But if they get caught up in it and it becomes their identity, or they have this dopamine rush every time they get a like or whatever, they're starting to live an inauthentic life, even though, their pictures may be authentic or inauthentic, with filters and, food and everything to make their world look glamorous to all their friends and everything. But the reality is, it still goes to people that are authentic in person are the ones that are winning in the world, whether they're young or old, or it does not matter. And I think that's the part, is the online world is a whole nother world that people can, if it's important for groups of people to be in that, it's important to live in that. For me, it's, when you get in front of people is when you're really going to make decisions and make money, have good relationships, find a spouse, all those things. It's because that you're yourself, that you find who you are. And I think it's a good about leadership and making decisions, is when you actually become where you share your decisions publicly of whatever your private thoughts are. People actually will respect you more than you think. I often do this just to challenge like other leaders, is like, I know I don't think the same way as some leaders, and I'll challenge them by thinking differently. And it's funny how easily people are persuaded when someone, because they're like, oh, is this the new public opinion? Then I need to agree with him. And then I make the point is like, well, what's your private opinion?
Does everyone agree with Aaron? Am I wrong? Am I in the minority now?
It really is the loudest voice in the room that often persuades, and that oftentimes is in the CEO, and it's true. It's, in a boardroom or a board of directors.
For sure.
It's someone different. But
hey, Aaron, thanks so much for being with us. My takeaway from talking with Aaron was when he was talking about really facilitating the decision making. You remember that? And he was talking about how the first thing that he has people do when they're coming to sort of, he didn't say consensus, but a decision to action, was establishing a vision, like where are we trying to go, understanding the language, which I thought was a good point. I mean, I've talked with people who really will be in conversations with people, and these people are using technical language or acronyms or concepts that they don't understand, and it puts them in a sort of an anxious position. So understanding the common vision, understanding the language, and then looking at providing clarity. And so he really saw his role as just making sure everybody understood. He even asked that question, how do you interpret that?
Yeah.
So it was allowing sort of these groups, and a lot of his work was around group decision making. And so that was sort of the takeaway I had, is really facilitating clear communication in that.
My biggest takeaway was when he said he's not looking to achieve consensus. When helping groups make decisions, he's not trying to get them to have consensus. He's just trying to get them to take action. And that's huge, because I think a lot of times, I know I've been in group decision-making processes that didn't go very well. And it felt like we were always trying to get everyone to agree. We could have 9 out of 10 people be on board, and we'd have one person who, I don't think so. And what do we have to do to convince this 10th person? Well, dang, we got 9 out of 10. Let's move on. We probably could have moved on when we were at 6 out of 10. What are we doing? Let's go. That was a huge takeaway for me.
Yeah.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support. It helps others find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more daily decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Decidedly Podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Sanger Smith, and this is Decidedly.
Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.